Hello everyone, welcome to the channel again. My name is Ritanshu. This is in continuation of Azure training. So today we are going to cover how to deploy .NET application to the Linux server. So we will be covering this on 4 headings, like what is the prerequisite, what is the deployment architecture, what is CASTREL server and need, and what is the deployment steps. Let's see what is the prerequisite. Before installing the .NET application to the Linux server, we have to make sure that we have a .NET Core greater than 3.1, Linux VM on Azure. So as we have covered in the previous video how to create a virtual machine on Azure, the same way we can create the Linux virtual machine on the Azure with the Putty to connect from your local Windows server to Linux server. WinSCP, this tool is used to transfer the file from your Windows server to Linux server. Or we will need any reverse proxy server installed in Linux like IS or Apache or Nginx. So just before deploying the .NET application to the Linux server, let's understand how the request works. Because most of the .NET developers used to deploy the application on the IS, they don't make a difference whether a request is getting handled by the web server or the app server. But in the other than Windows server or other than IS server, we have to understand how the request is going through the web server and then going to the app server. So any request, if it's coming over the HTTP, web server is handling the HTTP request, and whatever the code you have deployed, that will be served by the app server. So web server then makes request to the app server using the HTTP context and getting the response. For the .NET, before we were installing the .NET application onto the Windows server, but as core comes into the picture, we can deploy our .NET application into any kind of a server. Either it can be Linux or it can be a Mac or Windows. So what is in the .NET Core app, web app, so that we can deploy those applications to the any server. So .NET has introduced with the Core app a CASTREL server. CASTREL server is used to deploy the .NET application independent of any platform. Like it can be deployed onto the Linux server, it can be deployed onto the Windows server or the Mac server. So CASTREL is nothing but CASTREL is a cross-platform web server for ASP.NET Core. CASTREL is the web server that's included and enabled by the default in ASP.NET Core project templates. So CASTREL is a default methodology for the .NET Core application to deploy, so that we should not change the configuration again and again. So many people ask, when we have a IIS, we have a Apache, we have a Nginx, we have a different app and web server, then what is the role of CASTREL? If you see in the latest release of .NET, Microsoft has introduced one CASTREL web server as a intermediary server. CASTREL web server they have introduced to deploy the application into the multiple platform without changing the configuration. So suppose you have developed the .NET Core application. .NET Core application can be configured to deploy onto the multiple servers or different servers. Suppose you have a package and you want to deploy that package, that web app, to the Windows server. So either one way is either you go and change the configuration that you want to use the IS server and you can deploy that application. The second way, you just keep your project with the default configuration, with the CASTREL configuration, and deploy those application using that CASTREL configuration, because that CASTREL is coming with the .NET framework. It is not part of any OS. It is part of your .NET installation, your framework installation. So you can run the application. What is the problem? Why only CASTREL cannot work? That we will discuss later. But try to understand why CASTREL is needed. Let's suppose if you won't introduce the CASTREL, every time when you deploy the application on different platform, you have to change the configuration. So that's why Microsoft has introduced the CASTREL. Any request is coming through the HTTP, CASTREL server is handling those requests, and with the HTTP context, it is forwarding that request to the app server. Now we'll see the steps to deploy .NET applications to Linux server. So we'll see the step by step how to deploy those .NET application to the Linux server. So if you just see, I have just written all the steps. We have to first create the project. We have to make sure that it is created more than 3.1 framework, core framework. That application first we run on the ISX CASTREL server for testing, and then we'll ensure all the rights and the Microsoft packages Linux server is having. Then we'll install all the required software in the Linux server. Then we will copy the publish folder. Then we run the application. So let me start with the So I'm just creating a new project. If you see, we have to create a web app, core app. So ASP.NET Core, web API, then web app. Next, just name it demo, Linux, create, and just I am unchecking the HTTPS configuration and create it. So project has been created. As I told, if you see, go to the program, if you see, it is hosted on the default web server. I am just clicking on this, and you can see here, this is nothing, this configuration is on the default CASTREL server. If you can go and see the definition and comment over there. So you see, use Kestrel server as the web server and configure it using the, I'm just going and hitting this on IS first. So if you see, so this is on the IS server. Default IS Express comes with the .NET. So this is running on the IS Express. Now I am going to run on the CASTREL server. So CASTREL server by default will be running on the 5000 port. So just run this. And you can see your application is running on the 5000 port. This is using the CASTREL server. Now go to the Azure portal. Here you have seen I have created a Linux machine, Linux testing group, Linux machine. So now you can connect this machine using the Putty. So I'm just copying the IP address. Connect to machine. I think password I entered wrong. So connected to Linux server. So connected to the Putty, and I'm just copying this command and running it to the Linux server. I already have installed this, that's why it is providing the error, but package is getting updated. Now I will install the .NET SDK onto the Linux server. So for installing that, these commands are there. This is mentioned in the Microsoft document also. So we can just copy and we can put those commands too. So this SDK is installed now. Now we will copy the publish folder to the Linux server. So I am going to just publish my application to some folder. We are not going to publish this to IS or somewhere else. So just right click and publish it. If you see the configurations, see it is releasing on this folder, and if I see the target framework, it is 3.1 and it is framework dependent. So if I want to deploy on the Docker and all, then we have to put it self-contained, but currently I am not going over there, just publishing it. So it got published. Now we need to copy this publish folder to the Linux server. For copying from Windows to Linux server, as I told before, we required WinSCP software. So I have just installed, and in the left hand side I have selected the publish folder, and in the right hand side we have a Linux server. So I have to just copy this publish folder to I have created one more folder to demo app and I have pasted here. So when the copy is completed, then again go to the Putty and navigate to the publish folder. Now .NET run .NET and run the DLL. So we ran the .NET DLL. Command is .NET demolinux.dll, and now the site is running on this port. So test the whether this site is running or not. Because as we have not installed any other server like Apache IIS or Nginx on the Linux server, so we need to check on the CASTREL server whether it is working or not. So to check that, I'm just going to create a duplicate session for this. So I've connected to the server. Now I will be running that application using the curl command. So I'm just running this command, and now we can see the response we are getting in the command prompt. As we don't have any front-end server, that's why we are not running through the browser. That's why the response is coming into the command prompt. Now to see on the public facing, we have to install the Nginx or Apache server to the Linux, so that we can use this site outside of that Linux server as the public facing website or web app. So we'll see how it works. So now we'll see why we need a third server or some different server also to run the application when we have a CASTREL server. So just go to the next slide. Now if we see in the current in the public facing website or public facing web app, we used a reverse proxy server, and CASTREL server is handling those requests via reverse proxy server. That reverse proxy server can be IIS, Nginx or Apache or any web server. As I told you before, why we did this, if we have to install IIS or Apache server, why we need CASTREL server, that I have already described, because the default configuration and or use the same set of DLL or same set of package in the different server, we have used the CASTREL server to handle the request. So now it depends on the reverse proxy server how the CASTREL server is going to handle the each and every request. There are a lot of other things also why we need other than CASTREL server any other web server. CASTREL server is very limited in terms of port sharing. So when request comes, CASTREL server is not sharing the ports. That's why it is very difficult to handle the request. The lifetime management is not very optimized in the CASTREL server. That's why also we use the reverse proxy server. And CASTREL server doesn't serve the static file. So it is very bad in serving the static files. Like suppose if you have anything in file system, so and that you want to handle and that you want to serve to the internet clients. So in that scenario, CASTREL server is not very good. So that's why we always use a reverse proxy server. How reverse proxy server works? Any request comes, reverse proxy server handles those requests and send that request to the CASTREL server in an optimized way. In the sense, CASTREL server is a single threaded, so it will be handling the request and leaving that. So it is CASTREL server is handling the request asynchronously. Now we have a multiple benefits to introduce the reverse proxy server. We can limit the expose of this particular CASTREL server, whatever we have deployed, what the application we have deployed on that. So now we'll see how we deploy the application using the reverse proxy server. So here I am taking the example of Nginx. The same steps will be followed for the Apache also and for any kind of server. First, shut down the application as we have started. So first shut down, we have a control C. We have set it down the application. we have to install that. To install the Nginx server, this is the command: sudo apt-get install Nginx, and just Control C and Control V. So as I have already installed, so I'm not just running this command. Then I will be checking the web server using the public address, whether the web server page is coming outside of the application or not. So I'm just checking whether the Nginx server is installed and it is running properly or not. So just go to the your Azure portal. Just go to your Azure portal and copy the public IP. Go here and paste. You see your Nginx server is working properly. It is a default page of that particular server. Now, after checking the web server by public IP address, if in case your public IP address is not working, you can go and check to the Azure portal whether your port is open or not for a 80 port, because that has to be accessed via 80 port. So we can go to the networking and see whether that particular port is open or not. In my case, it is already open. I have verified, but even though you can see the port 80, if you see, this particular port should be open. Now I'm going to stop that Nginx services so that we can deploy our web app. I'm just stopping the services. Now we have to make a Nginx services to run the application on 5000 port. What does I mean? We have to change the configuration of Nginx server so that it serves the 5000 ports what we have deployed or what we need to deploy that application on that particular port. So we are going to see how to change the location or how to change the configuration for Nginx. For that, we have to navigate to the Nginx sites available file. There is a default file under the sites available. So we have to navigate there. So I'm just navigating there. Go to the root folder. Go to the etc Nginx folder. Go to the sites available, and now I have a permission, but if you have a same permission whatever you are seeing in the first row, then you have to change the permission. To change the permission, the command is sudo chmod 4x7 default. So this is changing the permission to modify the default file. So I already have a permission, that's why now I'm changing the configuration. So what we need to change, we have to change the location so that it will pick the 5000 port on the local host to serve the request. So I'm just copying this and pasting it here. Now we have to start the Nginx services. So I'm just starting that. Now when you have started the services, you have already configured that your default website for this Nginx, when you are accessing those public IP address, then it has to serve the app which is deployed on the localhost 5000 port. Now navigate to the folder cd, then publish, then run the application. Now this application is running. Now we can see by running the public facing IP whether we can see this application or not on the public facing web. So navigate to the Azure portal. I'm just copying this public IP address and seeing by accessing this, you can see we are seeing the ASP.NET Core application what we have deployed, default application. So these are the steps and these are theory behind why we need a Kestrel server and how to deploy the .NET application other than Windows Server. So the same steps will be followed for the Apache server, or in the Mac we have a different set of command, but the steps whatever you are seeing, this is almost same. If you want to provide any feedback or if you like, please comment so that I can improve on this. And for more information on this, you can always navigate to the Microsoft documentation. This is a very extensive document to deploy with all the configurations and all. Thank you.